Well, good morning, and I'm very excited to be here with Susan Vincent, who's going to be talking profound knowledge in reading recovery, and she's going to be talking about a lot of different things this morning. But let's start by talking about, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, Susan, please.
Well, I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm an Ohioan. And currently, I'm a faculty member at Miami University on their regional campus in Hamilton. And so I teach pre-service teachers literacy courses, and that's my alma mater. I went to Miami
Wow.
University as an undergrad, and then I got my graduate degree there. So Miami University is kind of my home. So I've come full circle back to Miami University. But my first job was a first grade teacher. So I started out in the first grade classroom. And then I was trained, so fortunate. My building had a policy that every first grade teacher became trained in reading recovery. They just cycled through all the first grade classroom teachers. And so I got trained in reading recovery. And then time after that, I was fortunate to get to be trained as a reading recovery teacher leader, which meant that I would be the one that trained the reading recovery teachers in my area, in the Cincinnati area. And I did that training at Ohio State University. So I've been doubly blessed because I got to go to Ohio State and work with really brilliant people at Ohio State.
Okay, well, that's a perfect segue into the next question. And let me change the view here. Okay. I have done blogs around how life-changing the reading recovery training was. It continues to influence my teaching right down to today. And when I blogged about that, I found out there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teachers around the country who feel very much the same way. So I'd like you to talk a bit about that, how it's been life-changing, and especially how life-changing for you as a professional teacher and life-changing for the kids. So
Yeah.
that's a segue into the next talk. Talk about that.
Yeah, reading recovery, and I like how you use the term life-changing, because as teachers, we get lots of professional development. We get trained in lots of programs and different teaching techniques that might change, different techniques you use in the classroom. But reading recovery truly was life-changing. It changed me as a person because it changed me as a learner. It changed me as a risk taker. I learned how to open myself up, open my teaching up to my colleagues, and be vulnerable and say, come watch me teach. When you train as a reading recovery teacher, I don't know if everybody knows this, you have people come watch you, your colleagues come watch you regularly and help you. And so you have to be vulnerable and you have to be willing to say, here's my teaching, help me get better. And when you do that regularly, it just changes you as a person. You become a risk taker. You become willing to say, I want to get better all the time. You become just an automatic learner. Like after I trained in reading recovery, I knew that I would never not be a learner. I would always be a learner for the rest of my career. I would always be reading. I would always want to know the latest research. That's just what reading recovery does to you. So it's not just about learning reading techniques. It's about becoming a real true literacy professional. And so that's kind of how it's life-changing as a person. But of course, it's life-changing for the children because we, just child after child after child, we set them on the path to literacy in a very short time. Like reading recovery, you're not in there more than 20 weeks. And just so many children have been helped to become readers and writers through reading recovery. So reading recovery has changed my life, changed my career, and changed the children that have been affected by reading recovery. I will always be grateful.
Okay, I know so many of the teachers that I talked to about this with the blog just said it's like pre-reading recovery, post-reading recovery. That's how they view. And in terms of the learning from your colleagues, that's just amazing. I've been at this a very long time, and yeah, there's always a new thing. There's always like, what about? I've never seen one quite like this. Now what? And having
Right.
that fallback, uh, 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 learning from your colleagues is just so enormous. Okay,
I'll just say one more quick thing. Mari
sure.
Clay was the founder of Reading Recovery, and her stance was always tentative. Like, she never said, here's how things are, it will always be this way. She was tentative. And so all of us trained in Reading Recovery are always tentative a little bit about what we say about children and how, and when we're teaching. And that's a good way to be. It's a good way to be tentative about what we do because we're willing to change a little bit
Okay,
in our
you're
teaching.
going to get me on my soapbox for just a minute about Marie Clay, because there are so many people that I think underestimate her as a researcher. She was a researcher. She did some foundational research and real science of reading research, and I think people forget that she is or she was an amazing person. Her work and her body of work changed the face of reading instruction. It really did.
Yeah.
So kudos to Marie, and uh, I know you got to meet her. I never did. Doggone it. Okay, but on to the next question then. Is this for all kids, or there's some kids that it just doesn't work for, or what's that all about? What are you finding?
Um, well, when people say, does reading recovery work for every child? I think you have to define what work means. So to me, the short answer is no, it does not work for every child, just like no technique is going to take away all reading problems from every child, obviously. So no, it doesn't work for every child. But I think you have to go back to the original purpose of what reading recovery was designed for, going back to what Mari Clay designed it for. And really the purpose of reading recovery was to decide if a child needed long-term help. Did they have a learning disability where they were going to need long-term help? Or was this a child where if they got really intensive one-on-one instruction that met their needs, could they reach average in their classroom on the short term? And so if that's the purpose of reading recovery, yes, I mean, it really does work because we can decide on the short term, hey, this child really does seem to have long-term needs that some other type of help would be better for. Maybe this child needs some other kind of testing. Maybe we need to get them a different kind of intervention. And reading recovery has helped us identify that and gotten us more information about the child. So no, it's not going to solve every child's reading problems, but it does give us more information about the child and helped us to decide if maybe they need long-term help rather than short-term help, because reading recovery is never longer than 20 weeks.
Okay, well,
So,
what you just said made a term pop into my head that I learned during my training, and that is acceleration, and to accelerate the reader. I'm just saying that, and this also provides me a nice segue into the whole issue of phonics. Okay, now there are some folks out there, oh, you guys don't teach phonics. I'm sorry, I think we kind of do.
yeah.
I think, well, I'd just like you to go into the whole issue of phonics, systematic phonics, Elkin boxes, and all that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
what's phonics all about in terms of reading recovery kids?
So reading recovery, the lesson's 30 minutes and it has several components to it. And really we teach phonics in just about every single component. But specifically, there is a letter learning component where children are learning letter names, learning about letter sounds. There is a word work component where children are learning how words work. And we teach both analytic phonics and synthetic phonics during that time, depending on a child's needs, depending on what the teacher sees as the need then. We teach a lot of phonics through the writing component. And Mari Clay was very big on thinking about how children learn to read through writing, and they learn about phonics through writing. So every child, there's not many teaching techniques that every single child in reading recovery gets, but every child gets Elkonin sound boxes. So we do Elkonin boxes every day for every child in the writing component. But we also do analytic phonics during the writing component. And then when they're reading books, we are constantly prompting about using the letters, the sounds, the parts when they're reading books. So in just about every component of reading recovery, we're teaching phonics, both in text and pulling it out and teaching in isolation. And we're teaching different types. I think we get criticized, like you're not teaching systematic phonics because you can't find a publication that says these are the phonics lessons that we teach, because reading recovery is individual. And so no lesson is planned until the last lesson is taught. You teach a reading recovery lesson, you see how it went, you analyze it, and then you plan the next lesson based on that child. And so you can't find a published list of lessons that we march through because every lesson is planned based on the last one. But it's very systematic because we are looking for gaps. We're assessing every single lesson and then filling those gaps as we go. And just kind of interestingly, I just trained a couple of months ago in Wilson's Foundations, which is, systematic phonics. And I kind of thought, gee, I wonder if I'm going to be lacking. Since my background's reading recovery, I wonder if I'll be lacking in my knowledge or if I won't know this. I knew it all. And I thought, I've taught my reading recovery children all the skills, that I was taught in Foundations. I was doing all of it. The only points that I think that I would have we could have had a disagreement on would be the books that we would choose to have our children read. And that would just come down to the level of decodability. So really there's a lot of agreement. And I kind of felt good after training in that, going, yeah, I've taught my children all the things that I learned in that systematic phonics program. So yes.
Okay, well, that'll give me a chance to get on my little soapbox for just a second. First of all, about analytic versus synthetic, and I hope my readers are well aware that there is a ton of research that says as long as it's systematic, both those approaches work. And limiting children to just one of the approaches, the systematic or the synthetic approach, limiting children to that, I think is harmful. And that's just op-ed from me. But analytic and synthetic phonics, tons and tons and tons and tons of research that say they both work well. The key word there, though, is they also need to be done systematically. And I think you've alluded to the fact that by the end of the term, everything that needs to be covered will be covered, and teachers are well aware of what needs to be covered. And teachers are incredibly well aware of all the different phonics techniques. And it's music to my ears that you're out there checking out what might be viewed as the other side, but I don't think they really are. But I don't think there really are sides, but that willingness to learn all the different techniques. Now, the last thing I want you to talk about is long-term. There are some studies that say, oh gosh, reading recovery's long-term effect just isn't there. And I'd like for you to speak to what you found in looking at your research around that. And I'll probably, within the blog, I'll probably do some, include links to some strong research supporting recovery. But I want to hear what you had to say about the why sometimes the long-term effect isn't there.
Well, one thing I always kind of laugh when they blame, reading recovery lasts 20 weeks and it's in first grade always. So when you say, oh, it didn't last in sixth grade, it's like, well, they only had it 20 weeks in first grade. What happened in those other 5 years. However, having said that, my district tracked how our reading recovery students, anybody who had reading recovery, whether they came out at grade level or not at grade level, everybody who had reading recovery, we tracked all the way through how they did on their state assessments. And in our state, we assessed third, fourth, fifth grade, sixth grade, and we tracked them, how they did ultimately on their fourth, fifth, and sixth grade state assessments. And they knocked it out of the ballpark. Like scoring in the upper echelons very well. And I've shared this with you before, but 70, 80% of them passed the state assessments once they got into fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, those that had been in reading recovery. So they do hold their gains, at least in our district, they did. However, if they're in a district where who knows what is happening instructionally during those 5 years, I could see them losing their gains, because you have to have good instruction all the way through or you're going to lose your gains. So,
well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm remembering a conversation I think we had about this, and basically, I don't want to be too nasty to some districts, but if they're in a district where no one's progressing, and the typical thing is little or no gain for those 5 years for everyone, then how on earth can you expect a 20-week intervention to do much in that, except for at least they maintain where they were. But if for there to be, and I think in some of the long-term study, my criticism of some of the folks that are doing those is that they're not taking that into account. What are these districts that they're looking at where they're claiming there's no gain? Are they really controlling for the fact that maybe no one at all in those districts are making gains? And that might be part of it. But and I think the fact that your district had the kind of success they had is absolutely music to my ears. Okay, and that's the perfect segue into the last. It's not really a question, but it's kind of like final thoughts.
I guess my final thoughts, and we talked about this a lot, the whole concept of the reading wars, and is there any hope for, there's just so much contention between what is viewed as different camps and different sides. And I personally am going out there and getting trained in different theories or different camps. And I think there's a lot of hope because of people like you who are taking kind of a, what do you call it? The radical middle, like.
Oh yeah, well that's P. David. I don't want to steal that term from P. David. That's P.
Right,
David Pearson's term, the radical middle.
Yeah.
But I label myself a centrist, so
Yes.
it's the centrist movement. But P. David, that radical middle belongs to P. David.
Because the more I learn, the more I think we have so much to agree on, with just a few points where we might disagree. And the thing that I disagree on the most probably are the little books that we end up having children read. And we agree a lot on that. Like, I don't use highly patterned books for children after they have one-to-one matching down. I agree on that. I get rid of patterned books immediately as soon as they have one-to-one matching down. So we all agree on that. It just comes down to the level of decodability, I think, where we could sit down and have a good conversation about how much decodability should children have. And Nell Duke is a good guide on that, So I think we have people to lead us down this centrist path where I think we could do a lot of good for children if we could just get out of these camps and the talking points that people use and the arguments. I think there's a road ahead that we could do a lot of good for children.
And I'm looking forward to both of us and all of us traveling down that road. And I think that my original dissertation was done at the last set of reading wars. And what I found was there were more areas of agreement than there were disagreement. And that if you take away all the vitriol, that there's a great deal that can be agreed on. And I think the poor practicing teacher out there trying to make sense of it all. But there is much more common ground than we allude to. And I'd be very happy to travel down that centrist road with you. Okay, so
Agree.
I guess we've now hit that point where I always do the famous Zoom wave goodbye. So we have to wave goodbye a la Zoom. And thank you, thank you, thank you so much for your time and insights. And um, there'll be links to some of the things we've discussed within the blog itself. And have a very good rest of the week.
Such a pleasure, Dr. Sam. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.